And welcome to the Sportsnaut Interview. And we are joined now by Laura Albanese, who's a sports writer for Newsday. And we're here to talk about the New York Yankees and their offseason plans here following their loss in the World Series to the Dodgers. We're going to start the conversation off with the big one that it's on everyone's mind. Juan Soto. What are they going to do with him? How much will they offer him? How much were they willing to spend on him? That is the $600 million question right now. Laura, just give us some of your thoughts on Juan Soto.
I mean, I think, when you look at what Juan Soto has done, he had the most successful walk year of anyone not named Aaron Judge, essentially. So he came to the Bronx. He proved that, the bright lights weren't too bright for him. And I think there's definitely going to be a push, especially among the fan base that believes that Juan Soto needs to stay a New York Yankee. It gets a little bit complicated, though, because when you're looking at these contracts, we are seeing, reports in the 600 to $700 million range. That is obviously a big investment. And one of the reasons that that was able to work with Shohei Ohtani was because he was able to defer so much of that money. And that partially has to do with the fact that Shohei Ohtani is worth millions regardless every year because of his endorsement deals, his international endorsement deals. So he doesn't need to have all that money up front. I don't know that Juan Soto wants to be paid peanuts for like a couple years and then get paid a bigger lump sum towards the end. So the Yankees are in a little bit of a pickle because I think the one thing that we saw in this World Series is that while they're a very good team, they're not a complete team. We saw some of the fundamentals kind of abandon them against the Dodgers. We definitely saw some issues with their defense. We saw some issues with their pitching. So while I think it's going to be a big push, and while I think Juan Soto does want to come back to the Bronx, it's going to come down to money, and I just don't know how far Hal Steinbrenner is willing to go.
Yeah. There's only going to be a handful of teams that can afford him
Right.
with that huge number. Like you said, the projections are somewhere in between 600 and $700 million right now. Um, can you imagine any scenario where, because it's being reported that the Mets are obviously going to be heavily involved, and we know they have a lot of money at their disposal. Is there any scenario that you could see the Yankees letting him get to the crosstown rival of the Mets?
I mean, I do think it's possible, and it's just because Steve Cohen has the financial capital
Yeah.
not only to pay for Juan Soto, but to also deal with the luxury tax hit that's inevitably going to come with signing him. It's going to be interesting because if once you pit the Mets against the Yankees, it's a true bidding war. Because we're not talking about like guys going, well, the taxes are less here. It's the same city, or the real estate or whatever. So all things being equal, it's going to be a question of where does Juan Soto want to be, and how much of a discount does he take to stay with the Yankees, where presumably he enjoyed himself. That being said, if you saw how the Yankees performed this postseason, maybe you do start to wonder if you believe in the future of this franchise, which is a ridiculous thing to say for a team that made it to the World Series.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be these questions now where it's just like, okay, the Yankees beating up on these weak AL Central teams again, and frankly, like there are people saying, "Man, I don't know if even the Padres or the Mets had gone to the World Series. I don't know if the Yankees would have won." So this is a question. Obviously, he wants to win. He does have his World Series ring. He gets along with Judge really well.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of other young players on the team, but no, I do think it's possible, and it goes back to one, Steve Cohen having the money, and two, I think the Mets have proven themselves to be can't believe I'm saying this about the New York Mets, to be savvy, in the way that David Stearns has made decisions that, despite having almost unlimited funds, are fiscally responsible and kind of smart.
Yeah. How long do you expect this process to drag out? I mean, his agent is Scott Boras. We saw what he did
Ever.
last year. Yeah. So you expect this? He's gonna speak to all these teams. He's gonna want to have a bidding war, so to speak.
I would think so. I think the longer it goes, the more money he's primed to make out of this. This does make things a little bit complicated though, because before the handful of teams that are going to be in on Soto, you almost have to wait to see if you get him before you do anything else. So let's say you're the Mets and you genuinely think I have a shot at Juan Soto. That might even push like let's say you want to re-sign Pete Alonso, that might push that
Yeah.
down the road a little bit. This thing with Garrett Cole is going to be interesting to see whether or not they tack on an extra year to his contract. They need to do that, or else he is a free agent right now. So all of these are big question marks, and a lot of it surrounds the idea that Juan Soto is going to take up a chunk of your payroll, your salary, and then you kind of have to fill in the pieces beyond that. That being said, I do feel like the Yankees have been trying to keep payroll down by relying on their young homegrown talent. Those homegrown guys, if they get Soto, they really have to step up.
Yeah, Hal Steinbrenner just said back in May that, he doesn't think their 2024 payroll is sustainable, and he emphasized the fact that they put a lot of money into player development, as you mentioned, some of those young players. You also brought up Garrett Cole, and the Yankees have a decision here to make on him within the next hour.
Right.
So hopefully we'll get some news on that any second here. But regardless of what they decide to do with him, how do you think that would affect their ability, or their ability to bring Soto back? Do you think it has any does it play any factor in that decision?
I mean, I don't necessarily think it plays too much of a factor because I mean there was always an outside possibility that Garrett Cole wasn't going to exercise his player option. I mean, you look at him; he's a guy who grew up a Yankee fan. He's 34 years old. You're kind of like, all right, I'm done. Let me just stick here for the 9 years and play out my career. So I think there was always something in the back of their head where they would have had to pay Garrett Cole anyway, and that was a factor in their decision to go after Juan Soto regardless. So I don't know if that's too much of an issue, but then you do have to get back to the situation where if you do not tack on that extra year to Garrett Cole, you're going to have to start spending money for some pitching.
Right.
And that not only, I mean, obviously that there are some interesting names out there. You got Corbin Burns is going to be hitting free agency, but those guys are expensive. All those guys are expensive, and you need a rotation.
Yeah, and they've got a lot of other holes they need to fill. First base now. They still have to make a decision on Gleyber Torres as well. So there's a lot of holes that need to be filled on this roster. And if they're giving all this money away to Cole and Soto, it could be tough to get that done. Now, I mentioned the comments made by Hale Steinbrenner back in May, where he doesn't think the payroll is sustainable. Do you think, though, coming off the World Series loss, and they haven't won one since 2009, do you think he may put those comments aside and channel his inner George Steinbrenner and just go ahead and spend the money and try to, create this, I guess, super team if he can?
I don't necessarily think so. We've definitely seen Hal move the goalposts a little bit. It used to be like, I don't think a payroll should be more than 250, and then it was like, I don't think a payroll should be more than 300. So he has adapted. I mean, the Yankees still had one of the top three payrolls in all of baseball, so he has adapted. He is spending the money. But there's really only so far that you can go, especially when you're talking about that luxury tax hit, where now you're paying 100% interest essentially on every dollar over the threshold. So I do think he'll be willing to spend a little bit more. I don't think you're going to get into a situation where he's just throwing money, like burning it. And the indication that I get from that is the way that the Yankees have consistently handled their trade deadline. They hold on to their prospects. The Yankees sometimes overvalue their prospects. That's been historic. Um, but they hold on to their prospects for a reason, and it's because they're cheap. These guys are cheap, and you are going to need cheap players if you're going to have really really expensive players. So I think that's kind of how they're trying to develop it. They're kind of trying to build the pseudo Dodgers blueprint, except the Dodgers will spend so much more money and it doesn't even matter to them. Um, so it's a really really challenging landscape. Part of me is almost like, and I'm gonna get crucified for this, but part of me is all like, man, I don't even know if you go after Juan Soto if getting Juan Soto is the best possible deal
Yeah.
because you have so many holes to fill.
Yeah.
And when you have that many holes to fill, wouldn't it be better to spread out that money and I don't want to say create Juan Soto in the aggregate, but my God, get some pitching, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's safe to say the Yankees, their roster was a little top heavy. A lot of great
Yeah.
players at the top, but you mentioned it really showed up in the World Series that maybe they weren't a well-rounded team. So that brings me to the last thing I want to ask you about here. You mentioned some of the other options with the starting pitchers should they not bring back Cole. If they decide not to go after Soto or not offer him as much money as another team. Who are some of the other options that are out there? I know that Anthony Santander is a guy that who I've mentioned or who's been mentioned. Pete Alonso is
Mhm.
another name that I keep hearing. Are there any other guys out there that you think could be in the target for the Yankees?
Yeah, I like Santander a lot. For them, I mean, for me, like, I'm like, that their defense was just
Yeah.
not where it should be. So, like a true defensive outfielder, and again, it becomes tricky because let's say you look at a guy like Harrison Bader, who that was already a Yankee, one of the best defensive outfielders that I've ever seen, just in terms of like the first read and being able to take these really good routes to balls. So he makes difficult plays look routine, but because they're so top heavy, they can't risk the fact that one of their outfielders isn't going to hit for average or going to hit for power. So do you take that risk and bolster up the defense? Because frankly, like you were looking. I know Juan Soto was nominated for a Gold Glove, but there were times in right field where he didn't look. Like a Gold Glover
Yeah.
necessarily, and Alex Verdugo is touted as this great like glove, and he was adequate. But then you go back to great defense, not great offense.
Yeah.
You can't have these holes in the lineup. So, I think, try to get more defensively sound. Try to get I hate to say this because it's such a cliche, but, like, true ball players, like
Mhm.
gamers, because some of the issues with the fundamentals that we saw in the World Series were not problems with ability, they were mental lapses. They were things where it's just kinda like, "Why aren't you practicing this in spring training until, like, your eyes are bleeding, over and over and over again, like cover first base?"
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, they're gonna need pitching.
Yeah.
Every year they're gonna need pitching. I really like, believe it or not, I like Walker Bueller because he's, one of those low risk, possible high rewards if Matt Blake can do something with him. I know he had a rough year, but you have to remember the first 5 years of Walker Bueller was pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. As a Yankee fan myself, I'm kind of torn, with what I would like to see them do. It's great to watch Soto play. He's a fun player, but
Yeah.
that is a lot of money. So we'll have to see how it all plays out here. Laura Albanese, everybody from Newsday. We thank you so much for your time today, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me.